Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep, really deep, into how everyday objects can become like these incredible vessels of historical memory, especially when we're talking about family legacies and how those objects connect us to our ancestors.
It's funny, we often think about like big historical events, wars and stuff, but history is also it's kind of woven into the objects all around us.
That's so true. And the book we're diving into today really brings that idea to life. All That She Carried, a National Book Award winner by Taya Miles. Have you heard of this one?
Absolutely. It's about a cotton sack, the simple cotton sack, but it becomes this like thread through generations of Black women starting in the time of slavery.
Wow, so we're going back.
Way back, and it all begins with Ruth Middleton. In 1921, she embroidered a message on this sack that basically unlocks the door to this hidden past.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What does the message say?
Well, it reveals that the sack originally belonged to Ruth's great-grandmother, Rose, who was enslaved in South Carolina.
I'm already getting chills just thinking about the weight of that history.
And it gets even more powerful. So Rose gave this sack to her 9-year-old daughter, Ashley, right when Ashley was sold.
Oh my gosh, just trying to grasp the emotions involved in that moment, a mother giving her daughter this small object.
It speaks to just the brutal reality of slavery and the lengths that enslaved mothers went to protect their children, to give them something, anything,
Right.
in a system that was designed to dehumanize them.
I can't imagine. And what did Rose put in the sack?
Just a few precious things, a tattered dress, a few handfuls of pecans, and listen to this, a braid of her own hair.
Wow, each item so meaningful.
Each one becomes a symbol of love, resilience, a mother's, just this desperate attempt to comfort her daughter in the face of unbelievable trauma.
It breaks my heart. And Taya Miles writes that Rose told Ashley the sack would, quote, be filled with my love always.
I mean, talk about powerful. Right. It just shows you the enduring power of love, a mother's love, in the face of this force trying to rip them apart. It really makes you think about how we study history, how we look for those family connections, because so much of this is just not in the official records.
Right. It's like, how do we get to these intimate personal stories, these hidden pieces of the past that are so important for understanding history in a more complete way?
Well, that's where material culture comes in. Historians are starting to look beyond those traditional archives and recognizing that objects themselves are primary sources. Things like, Ashley Sack, they can provide these incredible insights into the lives of people whose stories might not have been written down.
It's almost like these objects become witnesses, silent witnesses to history. They're whispering these stories that would otherwise be lost.
Exactly. And Ashley Sack, it's not just any object. It's what some historians would call a story cloth.
A story cloth. Now, I
Yeah.
haven't heard that term before. What exactly is that?
So for centuries, especially in cultures where women's voices weren't really valued, women have woven stories into fabric, creating these records of their lives and communities that they could pass down.
So these story cloths are like alternative archives, preserving family history outside of official records.
Precisely, and they challenge us to think differently about historical evidence. To recognize that history can be preserved and shared in all sorts of ways.
It's giving voice to the silenced, offering us a glimpse into lives and beliefs that might have been overlooked.
Exactly. And with Ashley's sack, it allows us to connect to the emotional truth of slavery. The sack becomes like this tangible representation of love and loss and the resilience of Black families during this just awful, awful period.
It's like holding a piece of history, feeling the weight of that story in your hands.
And it reminds us that history isn't just dates and events. It's about people. It's about their relationships, and it's about the objects that connect them across time. And what's so interesting is Ashley's story. It makes you think about like all the ways history is saved, not just in monuments or big libraries, but in the everyday objects that we touch, that we inherit, the things that our families pass down to us.
You're right, like those little things tucked away in our attics, or on a shelf. Like each one could be a piece of the past just waiting to be rediscovered.
Yeah, it's an invitation to look at the stuff we have with a new kind of curiosity. A chipped teacup or a faded photograph or like an old piece of jewelry. They could be hiding way more history than we think they could connect us to the people who came before us.
It's almost like these objects are like portals that let us step back in time and really connect with our ancestors on a personal level.
Exactly. And what's so cool is these personal archives, these collections of family heirlooms and stories. They often challenge or expand on what we read in history books, right? They offer a way more personal perspective on the past, especially for communities whose stories have been kind of left out of the main narrative.
Thinking about Ashley Sack, it's amazing how Taya Miles, the author, uses this one object to shed light on the bigger picture of slavery and its impact on Black families.
Oh, she's brilliant. She's such a skilled historian, the way she weaves everything together, because there aren't many written records about Rose and Ashley. She had to get creative with her research. She uses this method called reading along the bias grain, which means she digs deep into those traditional archives and
Huh.
looks for any little clues, any scraps of information that could tell us something about their lives.
So she's like putting together a puzzle, right? Looking at plantation records, legal documents, even objects from that time to piece together their story.
It's like detective work, really, and by carefully analyzing those little pieces and connecting them to bigger historical trends, she can create a much more complete and nuanced picture of their lives.
It makes you wonder how much history is hidden just beneath the surface, just waiting for someone to uncover it, if we know where to look and how to understand the clues.
And that's why it's so important to preserve family legacies, not just for ourselves, but for the sake of history. Even when the official records are thin, families hold on to stories, objects, traditions that can help us understand the past in a richer, more meaningful way.
It's like we're protecting these alternative archives, making sure that a whole range of voices and perspectives are included in the historical record.
And that's so important for creating a more inclusive and accurate understanding of history, one that reflects the real diversity of human experience.
Now, I want to shift gears a bit and dig into those individual items that Rose packed in the sack for Ashley. Each one seems so carefully chosen, like a language of love and resilience.
I love that you picked up on that because they weren't just random things she packed. They were filled with meaning. They reflect the cultural traditions, the emotional bonds, and the survival strategies of enslaved people.
Let's start with that tattered dress. It seems so ordinary, but in the context of slavery, clothing takes on a whole new meaning, right?
Absolutely. For enslaved women, clothing wasn't just about being practical. It was a way to express their identity, to maintain dignity, to create a sense of beauty and self-worth in a system that was trying to take those things away.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, people find ways to assert their humanity to find beauty.
Yes, and historians who focus on material culture have pointed out how enslaved women often adapted and repurposed fabrics, finding creative ways to express themselves through their clothing, even with all the limitations they faced.
So even within those constraints, they found a way to have agency to be individuals.
Exactly, and that speaks to their resilience and creativity, their determination to find beauty and meaning, even in the face of such hardship.
It makes you think about the stories held within our own clothes. What histories are woven into the fabrics we wear every day?
Now there's a thought-provoking question. It challenges us to see the everyday things in our lives with a new appreciation for the history and the skill that went into making them.
And maybe to see how those things connect us to the larger story of humanity.
Now, let's move on to those pecans that Rose packed. On the surface, it's like, okay, practical, food for the journey, but just like with the dress, there's a deeper meaning there.
Definitely. Food, especially for enslaved people, was so much more than just nutrition. It was tied to cultural traditions, memories of home acts of resistance and survival.
Exactly. And pecans in particular were often linked to strength and resilience in Black communities. They were a food source, of course, but they also represented a connection to the land, ancestral knowledge, the traditions that helped enslaved people survive.
So those pecans weren't just food for Ashley's journey. They were a piece of their shared heritage, a symbol of their identity and their connection that couldn't be broken.
Precisely. It shows the power of food as a way to keep cultural memory alive and pass down traditions across generations. Even the simplest foods can have a deep and complex history.
And finally, we come to the most personal item, that braid of Rose's hair.
Hmm.
Such a powerful detail that speaks volumes about the bond between mother and daughter and Rose's effort to maintain that connection despite being forced apart.
Hair, especially for Black women, has always held deep cultural and spiritual significance.
It's about identity, beauty, ancestry. And under slavery, it often became a way to resist and express themselves.
Absolutely. Enslaved women were often forced to cut their hair or style it according to white standards of beauty. So for Rose to braid her hair and give it to Ashley, it becomes an act of defiance and self-affirmation.
It's like she's saying, you can try to take everything from us, our hair, our bodies, our children, but you can't take away our love, our heritage, who we are.
Exactly. It reminds us that even in the most dehumanizing situations, people find ways to hold on to their identity and self-worth.
And those small acts of resistance, holding on to their traditions, expressing themselves, become so significant when we think about the bigger fight against slavery and the struggle for freedom.
You're so right. These tiny details give us a glimpse into the lives of enslaved people, their determination to survive, to resist, to remain human.
And it makes us think about how those individual acts of resistance contributed to a much larger movement for change.
Because history isn't just about the big events and famous people, it's about everyday people and how they faced and challenged the systems that tried to control them.
And by learning about those individual stories, by listening to the whispers of the past, we get a deeper understanding of how complex history is and how resilient and hopeful humans can be, even when faced with unbelievable suffering.
That's it. And that leads us back to why it's so important to keep those stories alive, those legacies, both in our own families and on a larger scale, through research and education.
Because by understanding the past, we can better understand the present and work toward creating a fairer future for everyone.
Exactly. And in that journey, personal objects can be powerful guides connecting us to the past and showing us the way forward.
You know, it's incredible when you think about it, those seemingly ordinary things, a dress, some pecans, a braid of hair, they take on so much meaning in Ashley's story.
It really shows you the power of context, right? Like
Mhm.
how an object's meaning can totally change depending on the story behind it, the history it carries.
Yeah, and for Ashley's sack, those items aren't just about personal connection. They're like these little windows into bigger historical and cultural realities.
For sure, like take the pecans, for instance. Ty Miles, the author, points out that they were really important for lots of indigenous tribes in the Southeast and how they grew and used them became part of African food traditions during slavery.
So Rose putting those pecans in the sack, it wasn't just about giving Ashley something to eat. It was about sharing a piece of their heritage, showing how traditions blended and how Black food traditions survived despite everything.
Exactly. Food, it's not just about, filling your stomach. It carries so much history, culture, identity.
And then there's the braid of hair. We've talked about how important hair is for Black women, but Taya Miles takes it even further. She connects it to this bigger tradition of using hair to remember and to connect with people.
Yeah, she talks about how in many African cultures, hair is believed to have spiritual power and how it's used in rituals and ceremonies to honor ancestors and strengthen family bonds.
Right, so for Rose, giving Ashley that braid of hair, it was like this deeply symbolic act, giving the sack a sense of ancestral connection and protection.
It's powerful stuff, really. It's like she's weaving her own spirit, her own history into the sack itself, creating a tangible link between Ashley's past, present, and future.
And it speaks to how, despite having everything taken from them, their possessions, their families, enslaved people found ways to stay connected through things like stories, traditions, even objects like hair that held deep meaning for them.
Absolutely. All that she carried really makes us rethink how we view historical evidence. It's not all about big events and official documents. It's about these little personal details, those everyday things with whispers of the past hidden inside them.
It reminds us that history isn't just some dusty old thing. It's right here, right now, shaping our lives and our communities in so many ways.
So true. So as we wrap things up here, what are some of the big takeaways?
I think the big one for me is that history is so much more than dates and names. It's about people, their connections, their stories, the objects that tie them together through time. And those stories can be found anywhere, even in the most ordinary things.
You got it. We should look around at the things in our lives with fresh eyes, see their potential to hold history, memories, and meaning.
Like we all become these detectives of our own past,
Yeah,
putting together the pieces of our family histories to understand who we are and where we come from.
that's a great way to put it. And when we do that, we help to keep those legacies alive. We make sure the stories and experiences of the people who came before us aren't forgotten. Those stories can shape how we see the world today and inspire us to build a better future.
It really drives home the point that we're all connected not just to each other, but to all the generations that came before us and those who will come after.
And through these objects, stories, and traditions, we can bridge that gap between the past and the present. We can create a sense of connection and shared humanity.
So if objects could talk, what would yours say about you, about your family, about your place in history?
That's something to think about, isn't it? Until next time, keep exploring.